The next panel is going to be about what I think is the issue of our time in the Bay Area. We're going to discuss the challenges that we face that have the most potential to bring to a close that economic growth that we've seen. So as Professor Boskin was talking about, prepare for a rainy day. You know, we'd probably rather not. We'd like to see this economic success that we've seen continue, but we know we have serious challenges, and we're going to talk about them now. Employment is way up, and that we've reached and gone beyond the peak levels that we saw back in 2001 and then again 2007. Median home sales prices are on the rise. They haven't quite reached where they were before, but who thinks they're going to top out and we'll see the highest median home prices that we've seen in the region sometime in the next year or so? Show of hands. Who thinks housing prices? So maybe you don't think so. Maybe you think that they won't rise that much more. Rents, we know the story of rents in San Francisco, and they're going up in San Jose, and they're going up in Oakland and all around the region. It's become tough to rent an apartment in the Bay Area. And of course, we've got our traffic problems, and you now have to plan for a much longer period of time. It's tough to get on BART and the various rails and buses and so forth. So these are serious issues. These are serious issues for employers. You saw in the poll that you took that housing and transportation issues are a real threat to our region. We just took a Bay Area poll, and those are the issues that just about 80% of the folks in the Bay Area said were the two top issues in the region: transportation and housing. This has an impact on our ability to attract talent, for our companies to grow here, and that's the focus that we're going to discuss in the next panel. So let me bring up quickly the panelists, and we've got an incredible group of folks. First, Mike Covarrubias, Chairman and CEO of TMG Partners, our lead sponsor for today. Very, very successful real estate developer. As he said earlier, he knows how to predict that curve about as well as anyone I've ever seen. Steve Levy is Director and Senior Economist at the Center of Continuing Study of the California Economy, a foremost expert on the Bay Area economy, and the person whose job it is to predict what the future population of the Bay Area and growth will be like. Steve Heminger is Executive Director of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which controls much of the state and federal funding of the region, is the leader on transportation policy, and at one time, now much earlier in his life, the leader in transportation for the Bay Area Council. And Cindy Chavez is a supervisor for the County of Santa Clara, representing over 360,000 people in Central, South, and East San Jose. She was elected to 2 terms on the San Jose City Council. She's also the former executive officer of the South Bay AFL-CIO. So this is a panel. Their job is to disagree with each other as much as possible. I'd like you to, make sure that we understand the differences of point of view as well as the things where you agree. I think we're going to throw a poll up first, so you'll have something to do while the folks are speaking. So the question is, what's the best way to address our housing and transportation problems? Limit population growth, adopt new work practices to eliminate the need for offices, eliminate burdensome regulations like CEQA, tax real estate transactions to create a regional housing fund, or amend Proposition 13 for commercial property and use the proceeds to go to housing. And if you have a 5th idea, or a 6th idea, or a 7th idea, my email address is jim@bayareacouncil.org. Just send it to me, because you may have a better idea than any of the ones that we put up, but we thought we would start here. So let me start, Mike, I think we should probably start with you, because you're the big sponsor of the event, and we'll work our way through the panel. You build housing in this region. You've had a lot of successful starts, but you've also known when to slow down. Where do you see the outlook, and what are you doing, and what should we be thinking about?
Well, Jim told us to shake it up, so I think the good news, as you all know better than anybody about this economy, is that it's been jobs driven. And 3 years ago, when we all said the most important thing in the world was jobs, little did we know the ramifications of that would be so interesting. And in my sort of overview, what's happened is it's sort of shown our weakness, and our weakness is bad housing policy as a region for many, many, many years. And so real estate is a local business, whether you're in one city in the north or one city in the east. You determine what happens in your city for housing production. And so cities that haven't had any housing production, and particularly San Francisco for many, many, many years, when all of a sudden the jobs market explodes like it is, it exposes the weakness. So the housing issue is not a small one. It's connected to a lot of things, but in and of itself is something we have to figure out how to deal with on a regional basis. And we got some good regional folks up here, I think, that'll kick that off.
Thanks, Mike. So, Steve Levy, you've watched this trend over the years, how much housing we've built compared to how much we think we should build. You worked for Association of Bay Area Governments and MTC in Plan Bay Area and looked very carefully at the population growth analysis for the region upon which we base our regional plan. What do you see in terms of future population growth and the process by which we're trying to address it through creation of new housing for that population?
Sure. The modeling is done starting with job growth. Everybody who does regional forecast across the country does that. The fancy modeling term is you look at the key export industries that serve world and national markets. How are they going to grow in the U.S. and what share is the Bay Area likely to get? If you do that through almost any model that I've seen, including ours, you end up knowing that we have a high and growing share of fast-growing industries. Steve Wesley said it without a model. The future is invented here, and everybody wants to be here. The population growth follows from the job growth. Regions with higher population growth, with higher job growth, are going to have higher population growth. We look at fertility and immigration, but basically you end up with the number of people needed to fill the jobs. Households are done by looking at behavior of young people or seniors, and also considering whether we're allowing people to commute in from lower cost areas. At the end, Plan Bay Area, and Steve is going to talk a little bit more about that, organized that growth essentially by saying it's best served by trying to create density in areas around transit and around job centers. So that's the Plan Bay Area answer. My mother ran a little girl's blouse and dress factory back when little girls wore dresses and blouses, which dates it. And she said, you're never as good as your next season, which is what this panel is about. Can we sustain the growth? And Jim said it, the first panel said it, so I'm going to let Steve and Cindy talk a little about how we meet the challenges. But everyone should understand that the growth forecast we did for Plan Bay Area is being just surged past. Mayor Reed said we're the fastest growing metro area. On May 1st, the Department of Finance said the Bay Area, for the first time in history, is the fastest growing population center in the state, and this is the fastest growing county. So I'll turn it over to Steve and to Cindy.
So thanks, Steve. So Steve Heminger, you know, you're lucky you're not my wife. Christina is here. She can tell you this. And I like you a lot, but you don't want that role because every day when I come home, what do I say? It's miserable. I can't get over the Bay Bridge anymore. I have to park in West Oakland, or if I try to get on BART, you can't fit on the train. And I understand this is the case pretty much around the region. Left an extra hour to make sure I was here to open up the panel today. We've invested a lot in transportation over the years, and yet the situation seems to get worse. Why is that, and what can we do about it?
Now we're getting into
I don't know why I should consider myself lucky, Jim, because I think you bellyache at me probably as much as you bellyache at her.
I want to. I do.
We, you know, if there's such a thing as a good problem, we've got a couple good problems in transportation, and I'm afraid traffic congestion is one of them. Dean Lesher, who founded the Contra Costa Times, used to tell the story that whenever he was stuck in traffic, he would get out of his car, kiss the ground, and thank God for a good economy. And that's what traffic congestion is. I mean, if you want to trade this economy for the one 5 years ago, we had very little traffic congestion. Secondly, we've got a new good problem, which is the one you cite, which is what I would call transit congestion. For a long time in our region, we would get calls and letters from people saying that darn empty bus was going down my street again. We don't get those calls. BART is bursting at the seams. Muni is bursting at the seams. Caltrain here on the peninsula probably has doubled its ridership in the last 7 or 8 years. Those are all good problems to have, because the only way we're going to make it is to have as much capacity for our network as we can. And increasingly, that's going to mean transit capacity. And the biggest thing we're doing for that right this very minute, thanks to Ron Gonzalez, is we're building BART to the biggest city in the Bay Area. And that is going to mean a world of difference, not only to the Silicon Valley economy, but to the region as a whole, because all 3 major cities, which is where we want the lion's share of our growth to occur over the next 3 decades, are going to be hooked into the same heavy rail system.
I like to give Steve a hard time, but he's been an incredible public servant in this role for quite a while, and has done a great job, one of the top transportation folks in the country. So thank you for your leadership. And I'll take that BART to San Jose. If I could just get a seat, I don't even need to be going to San Jose. I'll go if I could sit on the commuter train and act like a commuter. So Supervisor Chavez, you have been involved in the city of San Jose for a long time. You were heavily involved in the development of downtown San Jose. You've been looking at this from the point of view not only of the city economy, but from the concerns that people have. We're seeing a divide in wealth in the region. It's undeniable. And we know for a fact that we are pushing people out of their traditional homes. When they run up into a situation, they can no longer afford to stay where they live, and they have to find another community. And it's shocking, and it's causing a lot of stress. What can we do to ensure that this is a region for all people, and that we're able to maintain a middle class so that we have a sustainable economy for the future of the Bay Area?
So let me talk a little bit about just what Santa Clara County looks like now. Many of you probably know this, but we're almost 2 million people, and we have over 50% of all of the households in this region speak a language other than English at home. And almost 40% of the people, and there are different numbers between 36 and 40%, are foreign born. And what that means is that we have this incredible richness of diversity. You know, San Jose, the city of San Jose has more Vietnamese people living in it than any single city outside of Vietnam. People here speak, you know, I forget what the language is for Chinese, but I think we're the 4th in the country in terms of the frequency of Chinese being spoken. My point is that we are a very, very diverse region with a lot of opportunities. And I think one of the things that we need to think about is how government, in partnership with our for-profit partners, think about infrastructure differently and aggressively. And so one of the benefits, you know, I should say, I had the benefit of serving in downtown San Jose as a member of the San Jose City Council, and so I like to build. I like things to be built tall. I think it's sweet that people call what we have downtown high-rises, they're mid-rises. But it's a very scary thing for people in the community to get new housing and new neighbors and to do it in a way that is respectful. And then let me make one last point. A huge percentage of our growing jobs here make less than $15 an hour. So when you look at, I think it's a full, and it may be more, Stephen, than 1/3 of the jobs, the new jobs are in restaurants and hotels and tourism. And what that means is that if you work full time and you make the minimum wage, you make approximately $1,200 a month. And that is the average rent in Santa Clara County. So what that means is that we have to think about policies. And it was interesting to hear our previous speaker talk about entitlements. I think making sure that people have jobs, places to live, and a way to get there is not, you know, I don't think this is exactly what he's referring to, but that's not an entitlement. That is infrastructure that makes it possible for us to live in one of the most diverse places on earth and take advantage of that talent. So I think what we have to really think about is how do we create the political space and will for people to continue to be bold about things like BART, and I appreciate you raising Mayor Gonzalez, because absolutely we wouldn't be celebrating what we are now without his leadership, but that's true for building densely around these these stations, and there's a lot of pushback, not just from the community, but from elected leaders, a lot of fear.
So let's focus on that for a second. So Plan Bay Area, the Steves, both heavily involved in this, predicts the creation of 660,000 units of housing by 2040 to serve an increased population of 2.1 million, I think that's the number. Yeah. And that 660,000 was reduced from an original projection was a little higher. And we, according to Steve Levy, we're out shooting so far, early in the game, we're seeing more population growth than we expected at the time the plan was done, which was pretty recent. So 660,000 units, 80% of them in essentially infill areas. Are we, nobody brought up CEQA yet, but we can use CEQA as a proxy. Are we going to be able to build the 5 to 550,000 units, I guess would be implied by this, in those areas, given what Supervisor Chavez just said, the reluctance, resistance, historic resistance to do it? If not, is there a Plan B Bay Area that we should be looking at as an alternative? Because the people are coming, and I don't want them to move it in my house. So what do you think?
Plan B is.
Well, I think the good news, I think it was Eisenhower who said plans are nothing, planning is everything, right? And Plan Bay Area was the first plan, and there's going to be another one after that and another one after that. And I'm sure we didn't get it all right in the first one, and I'm sure we won't get it all right in the second one.
Keep the planners busy.
I do think we've got the direction right, though, which is we do need to grow more sustainably. We need to grow around these enormous transit investments we're making. I mean, bringing BART to San Jose is $8 billion. We need to take advantage of that investment and make sure those trains are full. We don't want them empty. We don't want you lounging around in them, Jim. We want them full of people. So I think we've got the direction right, but there's no question that our direction is probably pretty aggressive, given our region's history. And given two things, I would say, the regulatory framework, which is awful, and secondly, the loss of redevelopment funding, which was critical to the progress we were making. We need to make headway on both of those subjects to realize the kind of ambitious plan that we've adopted.
CEQA question.
So I just thought of my own poll. So everybody, anybody in the room not know what a NIMBY is? Yeah. Okay, so a NIMBY, not in my backyard ever. How many of you know a NIMBY? You know somebody who's a NIMBY. Who didn't put up their hands? You're all wrong. Look to your left and look to your right. I have learned over the last few years that everybody is a NIMBY. And it means that if you're a development company who's supposed to be building houses, if the guy across the street builds a project that's going to block your views, you're against development. If you're a real estate professional and you live in a tower that all you do in your whole life is support real estate, but it's blocking your view, now the traffic's a bad pattern. NIMBYism is almost indigenous to every human being at some level. And what the gun of an NIMBYism person is called CEQA. CEQA is the bullet and the gun for anybody who wants to stop any project, anywhere, anytime. And we've talked about reform at the Bay Area Council. We've been chipping away at it for years, but the regulatory issue is if a city or a person or a company wants to stop a project, that's the choice drug. The drug of choice is to use CEQA. So, we continue to battle that battle, but it is a tough one. And so what you end up with is the local governments, the San Jose's, the Fremonts, cities that actually want to create housing for their voters have to take that battle on at the local level. If you want to use CEQA as a reason to not do high-speed rail or whatever, it's there. It's sitting on the counter. You just pick it up and you throw it in, and it'll blow up whatever you're working on. So that's sort of the fundamental problem with saying a Plan A is going to work, because Plan A has to go through the traps of state law, then regional, then local.
Michael, I wonder though, the state mandate that gave us this law gave us some CEQA relief if we sort of played along. As a professional in the industry, I mean, what's your view of how important that relief is?
As I said, I think there are tweaks that occur. There was a couple in the last year or two. The bomb is still there. It's still huge. It's a hair trigger pin. You can set it off anytime you want. And it drags out projects, if you're lucky, several years. If you're unlucky, it kills it completely. So it's a tough weapon to battle.
I don't disagree with secret reform, but that's not the issue in Palo Alto and in many cities. We've failed, and maybe it's too hard, to make the connection between providing the housing and killing the golden goose, which is the venture capital and the jobs. There have been no projects turned down by CEQA in Palo Alto, but there is enormous anti-housing up and down the peninsula. Everybody thinks the housing can go every place and the jobs can go in their city. But if everybody takes that position, we're dead. So yes, CEQA reform, and yes, permitting consistency, but also we need to get the message out that housing is an economic prosperity tool.
Back at the local level.
Back at
it's
the local level.
Politicians
What
who
about, given the market for housing, where we have a lot of folks who have a good job and can afford housing, and so it pushes the market up. We lost redevelopment agencies a few years ago, which were one of the major tools for building affordable housing at various levels. So I wanted to ask Supervisor Chavez, what tools are available to cities like San Jose or Santa Clara County to be able to combat the market if we intend to be able to make our communities available to people at all strata?
You know, the one good thing about not having resources is it forces everybody to work together. And so the city of San Jose, and I appreciate this because I was there and we had a pretty strong redevelopment agency, and like I said, I loved building and loved building housing. But we didn't have to collaborate with the County of Santa Clara or the other cities that were struggling with how to meet their housing elements, right? Smaller cities. What I think, and this is what I would be doing if I were a developer, I'd be demanding that local governments look at things like JPAs to leverage resources that come county-wide. So you're not trying to deal with the issue of housing city by city, but really by region, and able to take down whether that's tax credits or or cash, because we do collectively still have some money. Because I think holding us accountable for creating the political space and will for development to happen is very important. And I have to just say, I agree, I appreciate that CEQA is a problem, but to me the much bigger problem is when you have opportunity and people pass it by. And I'll just say this quick thing. I was in a meeting with a bunch of cities not too long ago having a discussion about how we could leverage resources to be able to build affordable housing. And everybody was really excited to do it from the smaller cities as long as the housing wasn't built there. And they were very specific. They said, this is a great idea. We'll give you money. You build it somewhere else. And very sincere. And so I think part of the problem / opportunity is we really do need to help people be bold about what's going to be good for the whole. And I also think it's a way to leverage affordable housing in a way that no single city could have done it anyway, to keep up.
I wanted to ask Mike, what does it cost to build a unit of housing? What does the market require for you to go in and build now?
Yeah, every city and municipality is obviously different, and it depends if you're building a wood frame 4-story apartment versus a high-rise concrete building in the city. So there's no one answer, but on the good day, it's $400,000 to $500,000 to build, townhouses or apartments made out of wood frame, which are less density than you might like, and it's $600-700 a foot, all day to build in the city, which means you have to then sell at prices that are no longer affordable. Each city has its own requirement for affordability, 10%, some have none, 12%, 15%, 20%. And that's a burden that gets added on, which means the prices have to go up.
So more density can actually mean higher price.
It does mean higher price because you're buying a site to build 500 units, but you can only build 400 at market, and you've got to pay for those 100 and use them as affordable. So it forces the pricing up. Which is not a bad thing if you were, where are the contractors in the room? If the contractors could get the price of construction down, this would all be easier. But as we all know, the other product of a recovering economy is, you know, you could build a project 4 years ago very cheaply because there was no demand. Today, just like the freeways are crowded, the contractors are busy, the unions are running out of people, so the price just goes up, as you would expect.
So let's turn to transportation for a moment. Steve Heminger, you know, we've had some good times and bad times when it came to transportation funding. Are we in good times or bad times, and how do you see the future? And you know, what do we need to do as a region to be sure that, you know, whether we're investing in transit or maintaining the roads, the road system, or all of the above, that we have the necessary resources to do it?
I still think, despite the fact that, you know, we don't have a lot of good news from Washington or Sacramento very often, although Sacramento has got a glimmer of good news going right now with this debate over cap and trade funding, which could potentially, depending upon how it shakes out, be a significant benefit for our region, both for transportation funding and for housing funding, and some kind of partial replacement, at least, for lost redevelopment money. But the big news in the Bay Area has been, ever since, and I'll again give credit locally, 1984, when Santa Clara County was the first county in California to decide, by gum, we're not waiting. We have 3 projects we want to do. We're going to ask the voters to pay for them. And the voters said yes, and we really haven't looked back. And so the self-help movement, as it's called, has really been, I think, the linchpin of whatever success we've been able to have in transportation funding. And whether it's sales taxes or bridge tolls or vehicle license fees now, the voters in our region, like you, Jim, they complain a lot about transportation. But God bless them, they put their money where their mouth is. And the mechanism we've contrived, which is not perfect, but the notion of entering into a contract with a local agency that if I give you this money for this period of time, you're going to give me these projects. And at the end of that time, if you haven't delivered, I reserve my right to punish you or not to give you more. That mechanism has worked really well, and it's what's been able for us to keep our head above water in the face of the growth and the issues that we're dealing with. Now, unfortunately, looked at from a statewide perspective, self-help is no panacea because the rural parts of California, especially the Central Valley, are left out. They don't have the tax base, they don't have the inclination. But thankfully, our region does, and I think it's one reason that we've been able to retain a competitive advantage because we're willing to invest so much of our own money in our own system.
So speaking of not waiting around, some companies, large employers, decided not to wait around and began operating, I think by necessity, shuttle fleets to be able to move their employees from where they live, in many cases in the city of San Francisco, down to cities in Silicon Valley. And that has become the 4th or 5th largest fleet, if you add it all up, in the Bay Area, carrying somewhere around 40,000, we think, folks a day. And it's caused a lot of concern from folks about privatization of transportation and use of public infrastructure and so forth. I'd like, your opinion and the opinion of the panel about this movement. Is this something we should be supporting and developing and abetting, or should we be looking at it as transportation needs to be public, and we need to find a way to do this within the public domain?
Well, they say no good deed goes unpunished, and that's clearly what's happened to Google and those guys. I don't, for the life of me, know what the heck's wrong with what they're doing. And what you often see, and I think you're seeing it more and more now, we're living through a time that, as the Chinese say, is quite interesting. And whether it's Google, whether it's casual carpooling, people organizing their own ride sharing and leaving the government out of it, whether it's Uber and all those guys sort of redesigning taxi service, those are all market disruptions. And if anything needs a little market disruption, our public transit system could use it. And I don't think there's any harm or foul in the Silicon Valley employers saying, look, a lot of our guys get to work on Caltrain, But Caltrain is having trouble, struggling with the number of riders it has. So many of them bring their bikes on the train, they don't have enough room for the people. Yeah. And so we're going to run some supplemental service and get people off the road. As far as I'm concerned, more power to them.
Steve Levy?
I think there are three pieces of solving the problem. And I come to it from what everybody in the room knows as a private business owner. You invest or you die. So one piece is what Steve said, and I think Santa Clara is going to have a sales tax vote in November for transportation. We need to invest more. But there's the innovation side. That's why we're where the future is invented. One piece of that is Google and Uber and all of these private sector responses, and I don't see anything wrong with that. But the second piece is actually something that Jim and the Bay Area Council have championed, which is to get the private sector involved with their expertise and often their capital in these transportation infrastructure and other infrastructure problems. So I think we need to invest and innovate because the growth is definitely coming and traffic comes with.
Well, the bus was never the problem. The bus was a symbol. A la New York, which promotes the tale of two cities, you know, the economy felt like it was getting away from folks, and it felt like just the tech folks were making all the money, even though all the math shows that for every tech job, there's 3 or 4 or 5 actually support jobs that are created. So the city is growing, not just at the upper end, but it was a good way to make an impact. And it was, you know, egging a bus seemed like to make a statement because they wanted to get the economics at the lower end lifted, which, you know, we're talking about raising minimum wage and all that stuff. So there's a lot of that that's going on there. Tech companies are funding money to help the schools. Tech companies are funding money to help increase the housing. So the good news is, you know, the results, albeit not timely or as timely as some would like, are on their way. And I think when it's all said and done, buses aren't the problem. They're the whipping boy of what the problem was. And I think we're going to start to deal with those.
So Supervisor, do you agree with Mike that if the tech companies continue to grow and they spin off jobs in various sectors at a fast pace, is that something that you think works for the entire region economically, or do we need to have a different strategy for encouraging growth in sectors?
So I should tell you that jokingly, Jim Wunderman pointed out that, I'm sitting to his right, or to your right, but to his left, because I'm probably the most lefty up here. So let me be a little disruptive here and make a couple of observations. One is it relates to just what the Google buses mean. I think we just all have to recognize that there is growing tension, and there will be continued growing tension relative to the income gap in this country. And we have to look at a whole bunch of different ways to deal with it. I do, however, just want to point out one thing relative to the buses, and that is this, that I think both VTA, Valley Transportation Authority, which is our light rail and bus system here in the county, should look and function differently than it does today, 5, 10, and 15 years from now, because the old system wasn't working or people would be using it, right? Like people are doing a workaround because it's not working. And so what I hope this means is that VTA says, well, what should we be doing to be more timely, use people's time better, be less rigid in terms of how we draw our lines, what kinds of buses we use, what's the quality of them. And so you'll start to see in Silicon Valley bus rapid transit in part to deal with that. But this shuttle system is a really important opportunity. Now, one of the problems is the public sector can't do shuttle service. Like we can't do a shuttle service from here to San Francisco because of some state laws, but we can do a JPA with other partner organizations, and that's the kind of stuff we should be innovating and thinking about. And the reason is that the Google buses take passengers who have jobs. We have to take people who are trying to find jobs. And so we need to leverage public dollars and private dollars to make that happen, because this growing income gap, it really is and will continue to tear our communities apart. There really is no way for one group of people to continue to get wealthier and one group of people to continue to get poor and live in a safe, prosperous area. It just isn't going to happen.
That sounds like it calls for a regional solution. So I will give each one of you about 30 seconds in your final lightning round. I'll start with you, Steve, because you have your hand raised. 30 seconds, and say what you needed to say, and then what, if you could do one thing to improve the Bay Area and resolve this issue, what would it be? Steve Levy.
I often end up agreeing with Cindy, but from a very different perspective. So I'll go back to something that Michael said at the very beginning. Another piece of the investment strategy is education and training. I don't worry about inequality as much as I worry about people trapped in poverty. It's not because I'm a do-gooder, it's because an economy that leaves 30% of the people behind can't function well.
Thank you. Steve?
My quick one, Jim, and it was back on your question, what's the best way to deal with housing and transportation? And I would come up with a different answer, which is together. And so I'm going to be an optimist on this panel. I'm usually playing the pessimist.
Yeah, this is different.
We've got to start. We've got to start of doing it together. And frankly, one of the most effective transportation strategies we have ever seen is when you're able to develop more housing where the folks need to work. I mean, we constantly look at trans-bay travel and whether or not we need a new bridge or a new crossing. Comes up every 10 years. It never pencils out. But what does pencil out is if we could build more housing on the peninsula, then you don't have to cross the bridge to get to your job. And that's really the trick.
And speaking of working together, we'll be taking a trip, Bay Area Council trip, and you're part of it, and your team and other transit agencies next week to Washington, D.C. to meet with federal officials and explain that we speak with one voice. Supervisor, what can we do to fix it all?
Well, I think, you know, one thing that happens in this, when you run for office or anything like that, someone will say, hey, in 30 seconds, change the world. So I'm going to avoid doing that mock change and make this observation. I think that cities and counties need to be able to do more than one thing well, right? So VTA needs to step up its game relative to transportation. We need to make those Google buses less appealing by being more appealing ourselves. Transportation and housing, to me, are the most important things outside of education, which I don't particularly govern, but that we can do to help other people succeed. And so what I would be saying to all of you is demand from us that we partner with the private sector to deal with the housing solution, because while we've seen this huge growth in jobs, we've also seen the largest growth of homeless people in our history living in San Jose, and both of those things need to be dealt with together. And I think a key component of that is housing and transportation, both as an economic engine and a public opportunity.
Thank you, Supervisor. Mike, you can close the show.
Oh, good.
What's part of the show?
Yeah, I think that, you know, if you start with all the pieces, the first piece is economic welfare and engine strength. So something at the top has to make money so that it can help provide the services all the way down the food chain. And I think Cindy may have hit a good idea, which is the government has assets, the cities have assets, and the private sector thinks it knows how to make those assets more valuable. So if there was a way to get the private sector and the public sector on a regional basis to sort of attack things like workforce housing, you know, is the unfettered part of this problem. We can solve the rich problem because we can get them $10 million condos, and we can help on the lower end by, you know, things like minimum wage. But at the end of the day, this region survives, I think, on the workforce income bracket and the workforce housing. So that's what we got to sort of do. And I think if you looked around at all the cities and all the counties, you'd find lots of assets. You'd find lots of land and lots of schools that aren't being used at all or properly. And together, like the Concord Naval Station, you know, there's land there, there's government, and there's private. And we got to figure a way as a region to put those together, and maybe the Bay Area Council is a conduit for that. But
Chinese investment.
With
That's
Chinese
going back
investment.
to the previous panel.
We've connected the dots. And so I think that would be a way to focus on getting the best of them and getting them to cooperate.
I want to thank you for being a tremendous panel and bringing various perspectives. And you know, these are not easy issues to solve, but working together, we need to solve them, and so that the Bay Area can continue to succeed at succeeding. Thank you very much. We are going to give you a 25-minute break to kind of hang out. There should be desserts outside. Come on back, and we've got some great panels. Thank you.